I've got an answer for you, but I'd kind of like to know what your answer is because your answer, I assume, is going to be a little bit different. Well, what is the question? The question is, what is the hardest part about autism? I mean, if there's one thing with autism, assuming that you are a person with autism, if there is one thing throughout your life that you would say, this was the toughest part about being autistic, what would you identify? I couldn't come up with one, but I could come up with two. I couldn't tell which one was more difficult to deal with than the other, so I just said, okay, I came up with two of them because they're about the same. So I decided I was going to call these the conjoined twins of problems with autism. I just made that up off the top of my head. I'm not sure it fits, but yeah. Okay, what are these two things? Well, number one is avoidant personality disorder. And number two is selective mutism. To me, they're just kind of not the same, but they're so closely intertwined that you just can't pull them apart. In fact, maybe they have grown together. Maybe they started out together, but they're distinct. They're different, but they're the same. Avoidant personality disorder simply means that you avoid circumstances that are stressful that will cause anxiety. And I always like to use this illustration. If you've watched my videos in the past, you've heard me say this before, but a lot of folks get something that's akin to this when they are engaged in public speaking. They become fearful. They become anxious, overwhelmed with anxiety. They're just fearful. The other part is selective mutism, and they call it selective because there are some people, not everybody, but there are some people around whom the person with autism just simply can't communicate. I mean, it's not that they don't want to talk, they can't talk. I mean, literally, and I've experienced that throughout my life. The one thing that makes it a little bit different from my experience, as opposed to what other people with autism tend to think, or tend to experience, I should say, is that mine seems to be almost universal. It's not that there's a few people, or I should say when I was growing up, there seems to be a few people that can get inside my bubble effortlessly. And we get along fine, just like I'm not autistic. I mean, I can think of maybe a dozen people throughout my life. Now, I'm coming from a perspective of a guy who is 70 years old. I'm going to be 71 in a few weeks. So what I'm talking about is what I've experienced over the years. And one thing that I've experienced is these things don't go away. Now they have become a little bit subdued. I've learned to control them and deal with them and do a little bit of masking where I can fake it a little bit, fake it till you make it, except I never make it. So they're still there. It's always a problem, and these things need to be dealt with. So even if these are not your two greatest problems as a person with autism, still something we need to talk about, and I'm going to talk about it from the qualification of a person who has experienced these things and continues to experience them. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I have no formal training, I'm autodidactic. I love to study psychology. To me, it's just absolutely fascinating. But there's a time when you got to go talk to a pro. I'm not a pro. I'm not that person. I'm the guy who has gone through every stage of life because I'm almost to the end, So whatever stage of life you are in, unless you're older than me, I've been there. I've not had the exact same circumstances you've had, but I've been in that stage of life. So that is my credential. Or credentials. Those are my qualifications. All right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about something that is involuntary, that is innate. And I like to use the illustration, the analogy of a possum. You may remember from another video, I gave this a name. I called it the possum syndrome. And a possum, they say a possum is playing possum. No, they're not playing. They can't not do what they do. When they are confronted with stress, anxiety, fear, they just... what do? They kind of pass out, but they just freeze. They didn't pass out. I mean, they're conscious from what I understand. They're just frozen. Now that is selective mutism. You're just frozen. You can't come out of it. You can't will yourself out of it. You can't wake yourself up. Or at least I can't. Now, as I get older, I'm starting to recognize it, recognize the onset of it when it starts to come upon me, and I kind of think my way through it, but I'm never totally out of it. Again, I can mask it a little bit, but not a whole lot. Now, what is this like? Well, if you're not autistic, you may think of it in these terms. Have you ever had a seizure? Maybe not, but you've probably had cramps, right? So you could use either one of these as an analogy. But let's say that you had a leg cramp, and it wouldn't stop. I mean, it just would not stop. Or you had a seizure, and the seizure would not stop. Now, if you get away from people, the cramp goes away, right? Or if you have a seizure, the seizure goes away. So what are you going to do? You want the cramp to stop. You want the seizure to stop. So you're going to get away from people. That is my experience with selective mutism. The only way I can make it go away, particularly as a kid, is to get away from people. Now, imagine going to school, living in abject fear, terrorized. That's selective mutism. Day after day, week after week, but you get the weekends off. You know, you get the evenings off. You get the summers off, or at least we used to. But that is what this is akin to. It is just like having a cramp that won't go away, unless you get away from people. So if you have this with selective mutism, it makes perfect sense that you'd want to get away from people. You'd want to be avoidant, because you want the cramp to stop. You want the selective mutism to stop. You want the anxiety to stop, I guess is a better way to say it. So you're in the possum. You don't like being frozen because you're conscious. You know what's going on. You want to get back to eating rodents. I don't know what possums eat. I do know this. They've been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Whatever they're doing, it seems to be working for them. So maybe this is working for us. I don't know. So those are some of the characteristics of this, what did we call it, conjoined twins of avoidant personality disorder and selective mutism. And I seem to think that, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, I've not seen any research about this, but I'm guessing that selective mutism kind of gives birth to avoidant personality disorder. Or maybe they just come on at the same time. Don't really know. All right, with those things out of the way, we now have a basis, a foundation for what we're talking about, and I'm going to scroll down on my notes here so I can see what I'm talking about. I want to talk about the outcomes, and these things kind of build on each other, and we're not going to talk a long time about these things because I made a list of 16, so you want to spend 5 minutes on each one of them. Now, I'm not going to do that because by the time we get to the end of the video, nobody will be watching anyhow. So let's go through these very quickly. The outcomes of avoidant personality disorder coupled with that thing where you just are tight and you can't communicate, selective mutism. And if I didn't say it before, I'm going to throw this in. It's not voluntary. It's involuntary, like a possum. He can't not go into that frozen mode. And when I go into that mode of selective mutism, I can't not do it. I try, I can deal with it now as I'm getting older, but you can't not do it. All right, here are the 16 things I came up with. I think there's 16. Number one is hyper self-consciousness. Now, this is a problem that I had from day one when I went to kindergarten. First grade, second grade, you want me to count all the grades, fourth, fifth. I mean, I was just hyper self-conscious. And that is an expression or a form of phobia. It is a fear. And it was irrational. I feared being around people. These people are not going to hurt me. I don't know why I had this fear. It wasn't like I was being fearful of rejection, even though I was, because I was self-conscious and I knew that rejection would follow. So in that sense, I was fearful of rejection. But I wasn't self-conscious because I feared rejection. I just self-conscious. And then I would feel rejection. Number two is that fear was perennial, meaning it never stopped. Now, I've got a term that I made up for this, and maybe it's a real term. I probably should have Googled it, but it's anthrophobic, meaning you just have a fear of people. Now, I say that because when I would get away from social circumstances or get away from people, I get away from the fear. It was just gone. I mean, that selective mutism, selected to be mute, when I was around people. I mean, with again, throughout my life, maybe a dozen exceptions. Number three, one of the outcomes then is loneliness. If you fear being around people, you're going to be alone. Now, some people are perfectly happy being alone. They don't experience loneliness, but when I was particularly a kid, teenager, even young adult, I was just very lonely. But the weird thing about this is you're lonely when you're around people. In fact, you seem to be, or at least I did, I seemed to be loneliest when I was around people because I couldn't socialize. I was reminded, constantly mindful of the fact that there's something wrong here. I can't interact with these people. So I was lonely. I was awkward. I don't know where that came from, but I was just awkward. I guess that's part of being self-conscious. But awkward meaning, well, part of it was biological. Part of it was neurological because I've never been athletic. That was never a serious problem with me. I know with a lot of people who have autism, not being athletic is a problem. I've got a passive interest in sports. I certainly do appreciate the ability and talents of people who are athletic. I'm just really not into it because, well, I'm not good at it. Maybe if I was good at it, I would be one of those guys who watch Monday Night Football every Tuesday night. I guess they start watching on Saturday, and then they watch the pre-show on Sunday, and then they watch the Monday Night Football on Monday night. Then they watch the post-show on Sunday, and so Monday Night Football goes for like 4 days. I don't know. I don't watch it, but that's what I hear, so maybe it's true. But I was very awkward, not just physiologically, but sociologically. I was awkward. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I did some of the dumbest things, particularly as a kid, particularly as a teenager, some of the most awkward, idiotic things that, looking backward, it's embarrassing. I mean, some of the dumb things I did. And teenagers do dumb things, but I was like the king of the dumbness of these teenagers. I just, very awkward. Social abandonment, I lost count here. I've got bullet points in my notes instead of numbers, so I don't know where we are. Social abandonment, some people call that social defeat. So there's this hierarchy that I like to refer to as the hive mind because neurotypical people are in the sociological frame of mind that is not unique, but is common, I should say, to all of them. And what they're doing is they are competing against each other. Some of them fight each other, and they have this intricate sociological network that I don't fully understand other than observing it and other than reading about it, studying about it, but I don't understand it from the perspective that I'm a part of it. In fact, I don't think they understand it, and a lot of people who are in the hive mind, neurotypical people, I don't think they believe there is a hive mind. I mean, they are so much a part of it, they can't see it. Now, I've got a good example for you. Good illustration of this. Sometimes you get so close to something, so familiar with it that you can't see it. You're not aware of it. For example, I was at my daughter's house over the Christmas holidays, and we were watching these old videos, 30 years ago, and one of them, my dad was in the video, and my dad's been gone for, 30 years maybe, but he was talking in the video, and it was kind of interesting, hearing his voice again after all these decades, but something really struck me as odd. I never heard his southern accent until I watched that video, and it was just overwhelming. I mean, it was overwhelming. Now, if you're in Michigan, you probably think I have a southern accent, and I probably do to you. But all the years growing up, living with my dad, until I think he passed away when I was in my 30s, maybe 40-ish, somewhere around there, I never heard an accent. I never heard a southern accent. But when I heard him speak on that video, I thought, who's that talking? I mean, who's this guy from Kentucky or Tennessee or, Alabama? Who is that? It's my dad. I was so familiar with hearing him talk throughout my life, I never heard that accent. Come to think of it, I can't hear my accent. I can't hear the accent of the people who live in my neighborhood because I'm familiar with it. So it's kind of the same thing with people who live in the hive mind. They can't hear their accents. They can't see their behavior because they're so familiar with it. And a lot of them, or some of them I should say, deny that there even is a hive mind. But believe me, there is a reason they behave the way they do. And everybody is in some kind of a hive mind. And all it means is, a beehive and bees behave a certain way because, well, that's the way they are. Humans are no different. And there's something about neurotypical people, they have a hive mind of their own, which is just about everybody, excluding those of us who are autistic. And that's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. So if you're a neurotypical and you don't like me talking about the hive mind, believe me, it's not a criticism, it's just an observation. So social abandonment or defeat, number bullet, I've got bullet points, is social isolation. So it's not just abandonment, it's not just defeat, but it's being alone. And we kind of touched on this a moment ago. But never have I ever felt so isolated than when I was around people. And you can't not be around people. You've got to go to school. If you don't, they throw your parents in jail. I mean, they come arrest them. So your parents make you go to school. They put you through this, and it is torment. There really ought to be, I hate to say there ought to be a law, but there really should be, that something needs to be done for kids who can't function socially in school, where it's really, in my opinion, a form of abuse. Then the next bullet point, which is a big one in my opinion, is depression. I've never met an autistic person, and maybe they're out there, I just haven't met them, but I've never met an autistic person who didn't have a problem with depression. Now, I don't remember being depressed when I was a preschooler. I don't remember being depressed when, in my early years of school, primary student. I was sad, I was lonely, but I don't think that was real depression, but the onset of depression seemed to be when I was in high school. Adolescence, teenage. But where did that come from? I mean, I wasn't born with it, otherwise I would have had it. Maybe I was born with a propensity to have it. Maybe it was just something that, comes with adolescence, with puberty. I don't know. But there it was. But my guess is my depression was the result of rejection. And that's the next bullet point, is the fear of rejection. So part of this thing about being selective mutism and avoidant is we just fear being rejected because we've been rejected and we know this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen. How do I know it's going to happen? Because it always does. It always has. I mean, this experience, I don't think is going to be any different. And guess what? It almost never is. So we have this fear of rejection that is an outcome. The next one is we interpret inaction as negative action. I say we, I should say they. People who are in the hive mind, they see our inaction as negative action. Inaction, by that I mean we don't talk. Inaction, we don't socialize. Inaction, the group knows, like a flock of birds, they all know when to get up and fly away. Instinct. I don't know how they know that, but there's a group of people, and they may all just get up and walk away. How do they know? How do they know? I don't. I just sit there. I mean, if I'm comfortable, I just, okay, well, bye. But they see my inaction, and they would see that kind of like rejection of them, or you're not very sociable, or you're a loner, or however they want to interpret it. The next one is low self-esteem. So people tell you either verbally, a lot of times verbally, or just through their actions, which are often hard to read, but when somebody just ditches you, I mean, drives away and leaves you at the side of the road, that is hard to not see. I mean, there's some things I can't see, but when I get ditched by other people because they don't want to be around me, okay, there's something wrong with me, right? And that manifests itself as low self-esteem. The next one is conflict avoidance. And that is when you have autism, people like to fight with you because you're because you lose. I mean, they fight with you socially. Sometimes they even fight with you physically. But yeah, you're easy. They can get a point out of you. Whoop that guy. Yeah. And again, sometimes we're talking about not physical fighting, but you know, that social defeat thing that we were talking about before, that social competition. And so what happens is we find ourselves avoiding conflict because we know we're going to lose, right? So why would we want to get into a social conflict if we know the outcome before it happens and it's a negative outcome? The next one is avoid social risk, which is almost the same thing. So I'm just not going to be around people because it's going to be, for me, an unpleasant experience. Now, I'm learning to deal with that, but I can't just jump into the river or jump into the swimming pool or whatever body of water you want. I can stick my toe in. Yeah, okay, I'm okay with that. So I can deal with it maybe up to my ankles when it comes to socializing, but it's just too risky. I don't know how to swim, metaphorically speaking, but I'm okay getting my feet wet. That wasn't true throughout most of my life. I just wanted to stay like, I didn't want to go anywhere near the swimming pool. Again, metaphorically speaking, I wanted to stay away from all social interaction, and every day you had to walk the 2 blocks to school and then throw you in the swimming pool. And you couldn't swim. And it was traumatic. The anxiety was unbearable. And the next day, do it again. Over and over and over again. And people, here I am, 70, almost 71 years old. People wonder, why are you so weird? Well, because every day throughout all my life, I got thrown in a swimming pool. So we avoid social risk. Another outcome is we just feel undeserving. So if you're constantly rejected, constantly left on the side of the road, constantly ditched, constantly never invited, constantly treated like you're a freak or a weirdo, you say, maybe there's something wrong with me that I just don't deserve to be around other people because nature, this is that negative self-talk that we do. Nature has singled me out and I'm just not deserving. So that is one of the outcomes of these experiences. The next one is fear vulnerability. We fear being vulnerable. And that's kind of like the things we already talked about, but we know we're vulnerable, at least I do. I know I don't have the social skills of other people, and I know that I'm an easy target. It's kind of like throwing a lamb into a pack of wolves. Yeah, you're going to feel kind of vulnerable, right? So we went from swimming pool to a pack of wolves, but fundamentally it's basically the same thing, but we know that we're vulnerable. And we know what wolves are like because we've been around them all of our lives, 4 years. So we know we're vulnerable and we know what they're going to do. They're going to eat us alive, right? And how can you not fear that? So that's what we go through. The next one is unfamiliar with social landscape. Because you don't socialize, you can't socialize. And other people, neurotypical people in the hive mind, they are born, I believe, innately, inherently to live like bees in a beehive. I mean, they're genetically predisposed to that life. And I think that's true of neurotypical people, but still, they have to learn something while they're there. We don't have it biologically, we don't have it innately, and we can't learn it. Or it's extremely difficult to learn it because we're unfamiliar with what's going on, because we're not part of it, because we can't be part of it. And if we try to be part of it, they immediately recognize this is not a bee. What's he doing in the beehive? And they kick him out. Kick me out. And I'm not sure I want to be with the bees because, well, I'm not a bee. You know, I'm kind of like a bee, but I'm not a bee, so I don't even want to be with them. But growing up and spending most of my life, I just kind of thought that's where I was supposed to be, and I would keep trying to participate and get involved, and everybody expected you to get involved, but you couldn't. All right, so go with one of those analogies. We had a swimming pool, we had a pack of wolves, and now we have a beehive. But the point is, you know, you can throw us in the middle of it, but we're still not going to be a part of it. So we're unfamiliar with it, so we can't learn it, and I'm not sure we could learn it anyhow, but we can learn a little bit. And then finally, this is the last one, is just social isolation. Now that is something that I've come to terms with as I get older. In fact, it's, particularly when I was a kid, it was something that I feared, whereas now that I'm in my 70s, is something that I kind of look forward to. I mean, why do I want to go through all the anxiety, the frustration, the traumatic experience of being in a group of people? I look forward to being alone. When did that flip? I mean, when did it come from I really want to be in the hive mind, a part of it, to a point where I really don't want to be there? You know, that natural inclination to compete with other bees, with neurotypical people, to be part of the hierarchy, to try to be the alpha or to get as high up the hierarchy as I can. At what point did I say, hey, well, I don't want to do this. I mean, this is crazy. I want to be by myself. I'm happy when I'm by myself. So social isolation is an outcome. And therapists say that's a bad thing because we develop through social interaction. Well, I think that's true of like 99% of the people, minus the people, those of us who have autism. And there are some exceptions to that as well. But I got to tell you, the twins, and I call them conjoined twins of avoidant personality disorder and selective mutism, have outcomes. And we need to come to terms, I believe, with those outcomes. And I always need to remind myself and remind others, this is not a flaw. This is not something that is wrong with us. That's a perception we have fostered upon us because we appear flawed or different from the perspective of others who happen to be in the majority. So to us, or to them rather, we seem flawed, but we're not. We're not flawed, and once we realize that, a lot of this stuff just kind of vanishes, like the depression. Once we realize, hey, there's nothing wrong with me, there's something wrong with them for thinking there's something wrong with me, I'm not sure that gets rid of depression, but I think it tempers it. It helps mitigate it. If you got something out of this video, you right now are invited to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, there's a button. So subscribe. If you mash down on that button, then you can be a subscriber, be part of our family. And while you're doing it, if you like this video, think it deserves it, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. If you have some input you want to add, people like to hear from other people. Have a conversation, start a conversation, join a conversation by leaving a comment and sharing this video on social media while you're thinking of it. That will help other people who need to hear what you just heard. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see y'all next time.